Hello everyone and welcome to our latest and newest version of our webinar series, Waste Technology Deep Dives. My name is Nele Kapp. I'm working on solid waste management at UN Habitat, and I'm happy that you were able to share and to join us today. Before we start, a few housekeeping rules. Please put any questions you have, and we encourage you to post any questions into the Q&A box. So if you look into the control panel on your right-hand side, there is a specific box for questions, and also please indicate to whom you are directing your question. Then there is also a chat, so please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat, say hello, and use it for general remarks. This webinar will be recorded or is already being recorded, and we will share the recording as well as the presentations on the NUA Campus website. That is the website where you also registered for this webinar. Today's webinar is brought to you by the Wuppertal Institute for Environment, Climate, Energy and UN Habitat under the Urban Pathways Project, which is financed by the German Federal Ministry for the Environment under the International Climate Initiative. In this project, we cooperate with cities in the Global South to implement activities in the areas of sustainable mobility, energy, and waste management. The aim of the project is to contribute to the climate targets, the SDGs, and the new urban agenda. We also organize capacity building and exchange of good practices because we believe that we can all learn a lot from each other. And that is why today we are talking about materials recovery facilities. As you can see on the agenda, first Richard Emery will give us an overview, and then Taufik El-Khashan will present a case study from Egypt. But before we start, we also want to hear from you. So we have prepared a few polls, and we kindly ask you to get ready to answer a few questions. And the first question we have to you is, we just want to get to know you a bit more and know which sector you are from. Are you from a national or regional government, a local government, an NGO, a private sector, or something else? So please take some time, find the mouse, and just press. And then we will close this. And as we can see today, we have, well, a third is from NGOs, a third from others, some from national, regional, and local governments, and also some from the private sector. Welcome to everyone. And we have another question for you. Today we have lots of questions to you, but these go very quick. So the first one is, do you separate your waste at home? Yes or no? It's very simple. And the answer to this is that, wow, almost 80% are separating their waste at home and only 20% are not. Great, thank you. And this next question is actually along these lines again. So do you also separate your waste at work or business if that is a different location and if you're not working from home? So think back to that time when you were not working from home. Would you separate your waste at your work or business? Yes, no, or is it the same location you're actually always working? We'll give that also a bit of time and we'll have a look at the results. And this is, as we can see, okay, more people are actually separating their waste at home and then at their place of work. Interesting. Half, yes, no, and some it's the same location. And we have one more poll for you right now, and we will come back to those later. So do you have a material recovery facility in your city? Or we also talk about integrated resource recovery centers. If you know what it is, you can say yes, no, or if you might need the webinar, you can still answer not sure. And we will also look at those results. And okay, it's a mixed feeling. 50% say yes, they have, so quite a lot. 40% no, and a couple of you are not sure yet. So maybe you know a bit more about this after this webinar and try to find out if you have one in your city or not. So thank you so much for participating. And I'm going now over to introducing our first speaker. Richard Emery is a civil engineering technologist and executive associate at JG Africa. He has over 20 years of experience in project management, engineering, technical solutions, and specialization in the field of integrated solid waste management and engineering services. He has also presented numerous papers locally and internationally. Over the years, Richard has learned that all projects must be approached with the priorities being appropriate solutions, applicable and affordable designs, and how outcomes affect other projects and planning. Welcome, Richard, and thanks for joining us today. We can see your presentation, we can see you, so I think you're ready to start and we're looking forward.
Thank you very much. It's fantastic, and thank you for everyone joining and participating today. I think it's a very interesting presentation that we've got going today, and it's quite an interesting and broad audience that we seem to have joining us. So we really want to just get going and see where we're going to head to. So just a little bit of background from my side. I work at a company, JG Africa, which is a private or consulting engineering company, and I myself have been involved in solid waste management for probably close on 22, 23 years, and every year delivers different projects. Why? Because we are very much in an industry that's a specialist industry, but also has quite a vast range of interventions when it comes to solid waste. And today we obviously talking with material recovery facilities, and we could spend half a day just arguing what really material recovery facilities are, but we'll get into that right now. But for myself, yes, we're down in South Africa at the moment, and I see the audiences from all around the world, which is fantastic, as I'm sure every single location and all of our spaces have different reasons for establishing a recovery facility. So just to let you know, we've delved into projects in most of Africa, and I wanted to just let you know, obviously from a company point of view, we cover quite a broad range of services, but what I've done here is I've highlighted in green what it actually is needed when you start looking or considering a material recovery facility. So you can see in the green there, it involves quite a vast number. You've got business screening, you've got environmental services, so immediately it starts talking to your licensing or your environmental impacts, your geohydrology, what is your impact of your recovery facility, geology, geotechnical, hydrology, which is your surface, your water, your streams, your rivers, land development. What's also interesting is that not just greenfields land that people talk about, but there's a lot of opportunity to develop recovery facilities on contaminated land, which is also a new nuance that we've got ourselves involved into. For instance, there's an old landfill site that we have actually gone dynamically compacted and actually have started to establish a recovery facility on top of this old landfill. So we're piling the waste into the subsoil, but otherwise all the platforms, etc., all based on top of this dynamically compacted waste. So we often think about greenfields and what that land development really means. Traffic and transportation, the other green highlighted item, cannot emphasize that more. That is a critical element, and we'll touch on that in a minute. Structures is obviously a critical component. Stormwater and roads is vital. And then obviously from myself, very much the specialization in solid waste management, which is obviously the crux, which forms the concept design of any of these facilities. Really just delving into, from my point of view, before the next presentation is, what types of waste can be treated, advantages, disadvantages, risks, limitations, why one MRF and not the other, components of a MRF, what's essential and option, and is there an order. I'm going to touch on all of those items, but you'll see there in the bottom there, the context is very much in a Southern African type context. So when I say that, I'm talking a lot more then with regards to the broader concept of what these economies offer and what those cultural differences also lead to. And you might start asking why cultures, and I think it's a very key component to developing a MRF. So you'll see here a difficult slide to actually fathom and enter. So what I've done here is on the left, you'll see, I'm just going to put it in there. On the left here, at the top left, I've got your waste material, and then in the middle, process, and then on the right, output. And what you'll see, whoopsie daisy, Sorry, don't know what happened there. What you'll see here is on the left here, you've got your types of waste that I've tried to condense into like a flow diagram. So you've got your waste that's generated, where it's coming from, and then where would that waste typically find its way through to the different ways of being diverted, or what I call beneficiated, so as not to end up on a landfill. Landfill grey block at the top right here. But what you're trying to see is how does a material recovery facility help the system of waste material and recovery. And immediately we've got to stop thinking about material as a waste, and immediately we start saying, listen, this is a material that just hasn't been beneficiated yet, and how do we do that? And today we're talking very much on material recovery facilities, and the material in this case we're going to focus on is more the packaging side, because that's typically where a lot of focus has been given over the past good many years, and has obviously raised a huge heightening of interest. But recently, certainly in South Africa and also in Namibia, and also growing in Mozambique to a point, is also the material recovery that's being recovered is organic waste, because when it comes to contamination or potential contamination, that's also a fairly big problem, because certainly if you haven't got a well-engineered landfill or a well-engineered type recovery facility, then it has all the potential for methanogenic or methane generation contamination to occur. So like I said, we're going to stick to packaging. So what do we say? Right. Well, first up, we can look at what those material types are that we're really looking at. So here we've got at the top here, mixed contaminated general waste. So basically that's your business waste or commercial waste, or your general waste, which is more your domestic or household. And that is all mixed in one bag, which is typical for quite a few South African SADC region countries, where it's just a single collection service, and all it does is recovered from your household or you as a point, and it's taken to a transfer station, or it finds its way straight to a landfill. And that's the most common factor at the moment. And immediately we start saying, oh gosh, how can we actually divert this material? So we start looking at what we call commingled recycle with dry waste. So what's become the next most economical and affordable approach is to have a two-bag collection system. So one bag is essentially your bag, which is all your organics, your small pieces of plastic, your broken glass, your maybe your cling film, all your pieces that aren't really able to be recovered. And then in your second bag, which is typically a clear bag, more commonly, certainly in many areas here, then that recovers all your packaging waste, which is your styrofoams, your cardboard, your paper, your newspaper, your Tetra packs, your glass, etc. that's not broken. And that is far easier and finds its way to a material recovery facility where it can be sorted. And that's where we start with material recovery facility in this context, which is your packaging waste and your papers, your plastics, your glass, your Tetra packs. And as you know, there's many different types of plastics. There's high density polyethylenes, there's low density polyethylenes, there's polypropylenes, there's flexible polypropylenes, there's a vast number of types. And you'll all see that a lot of material types, so that little triangle on, which shows you what type. And then from there, it finds its way to what we call either landfill, which is probably not, but it finds its way to a resource park or recycling center, which essentially returns that material back to being used for either a similar or same purpose, or it finds its way being brought back into another function. So for instance, you know, white paper, office paper, or the like, can be reused a good number of times before it just loses its integrity, and it can no longer be recycled again to become white paper again, or office paper, or printing paper. And then it starts becoming newspaper or cardboard or the likes of that. And then cardboard starts also then, once you recycle it once or twice, a few times, it also loses a lot of its integrity, and then it starts becoming a pulp for other, maybe fill in packaging, whatever the case is. So what I'm trying to point out here too, is you have a very critical component, which is your feedstock. What is it are you able to get? And what is it and where is it, which is these blue circles on the right. And also here, and what I'm trying to portray in this picture here, that material form part of a bigger picture, and that's using a system thinking. Very difficult word about system. You talk about recycling, you talk about processes, and these are all sort of generic terms that, unless you really start to delve into it, you don't really get to understand exactly the complexity is of it. And the problem is with us in the solid waste industry or materials industry is that there are so many different material types. And, you know, e-waste is a classic example of how complex materials have become. You know, 10, 20 years ago, there might have been only 10 materials off the periodic table that are used for technological devices. And nowadays, it's a number of items off the periodic chart that actually now form a part of it. And that becomes even more complex to recover. And in a visit to Europe, you know, there's an electronic waste recovery facility, which is also a material recovery facility. And it just shows how much breakdown of that you need to do just to recover at least some of the basic materials. So what has a high recovery value to it, things that can be recycled and easily recycled. So certainly the economy changes forever, but metals has a very obvious recovery market. Certainly in South Africa, it's a very strong market and dependent market. Now you're going to start breaking down electronic goods. You can eventually start retrieving gold and certain metal types, and that's definitely got a very solid market to it. Gold is a very simple one, especially for very low economic countries. There's very low overheads, i.e. you have the reclaimers off landfill sites, or you have the pickers at streets or bins who are going straight away for the cardboard. It's lightweight, it's easy to transport, and you still get some good money back. Equally so, white paper, like I say, printing paper, excellent value. Glass is also a good recovery agent. Glass does get broken. When it starts getting broken, it starts becoming very difficult. It's still mixed with other materials to start recovering that broken glass. So that's the bad part of the glass, but the good part is that it's got a very good recycling opportunity to it. So brown glass certainly washed and remelted and made into more brown glass for whether it be bottled or green or clear glass. But the problem is it weighs a lot. So this is where it is. I mean, when they had milk bottle delivered to your door, which is a glass bottle with a little cap, you hand it, and then you just handed out your glass bottle, and that got recovered, and then your new glass milk got placed back, and it was excellent. It's just a whole lot of reuse. Now you have got economies of logistics.
Richard?
Yes.
Sorry, this is Nele. Is there anything you can do about your connection? I think we're losing you a bit.
Can't do too much. Let me switch off my laser. Does that help a little bit?
Let's see.
I'll just go into the next slide. I can maybe switch off my webcam, that'll help. Hopefully you can still hear me.
And we'll see. We hear you, but sometimes it's breaking a bit, unfortunately.
Okay. I'll hopefully have the webcam off, that helps a bit. So it immediately starts now to say, where are we at then from a recycling economy? Because it boils down to the fact is, chaps, you've got a feedstock and a material that you want to recover. But then you have to have a market that's ready to pay something for the effort of recovering it. And what gives that benefit is the recovery of that waste stream. And why would you do a material recovery rather than just landfilling? Now, obviously with the environmental hat on, it's pretty much a no-brainer. And also from a cultural point of view, it should be part of our built-in environment that we really want to do that. But it boils down to finance too, saying we need to make this an affordable and an attractive alternative to what bad practices are happening, which could be landfilling or in most cases, like a lot of neighboring countries, and even in South Africa too, is that there's not good engineered landfill, so you are getting that contamination. So here on this slide, we've got the implementing agents for change. You've got to have your regulation, you've got to have your institutional instructions to say, guys, you need to start doing things differently. You need to have that legal drive. Then the recycling economy, you have to have the material available, and you need to have the demand from the recovery point of view. Who's buying this material from you, and how stable is that market? Technical, you can design anything, just at what cost? And that brings us to the next one, saying finance, and then your operator. Who is going to operate these material recovery facilities? More often than not, it's the private sector, because they need to be in touch with the receiving market. But what's end up happening is that sometimes the governmental or the public entity want to also operate. But you know, you also got different approaches. Your municipal sector or your public sector are more service delivery driven, whilst your private sector are a lot more output and business driven. And that's where the crunch comes in. But MRFs cannot exist just as an isolated designed intervention. You have to look at the greater waste material or material process. Where's everything going? Where are those interventions happening? So separation of source starts coming into the picture. Like I said earlier, you know, there's a very useful option is just having at least a 2-bag system. Just all your residual type materials and then also your clear packaging materials. After that, you go into a 3-bag system. You go to organic waste recovery and then your clean or packaging, and then you go for your residual waste. Because unfortunately, we're in an environment where the design of materials is such that we still have a lot of residual materials that we can't recover properly. But how do we do material recovery and how do we make it sustainable? Well, the quality of your feedstock that goes into material recovery says a lot for the cost of the operating and recovering, and it also says a lot for the value of that material you're going to recover. So the cleaner, the more consistent, the more reliable, the more trusted the materials is that you deliver to market, i.e. a bale of white paper is going to be worth a lot more than that white paper that's been recovered from a bag that's also had organic waste in it, food waste, it's a bit wet, dirty, sand, grit. You're going to get a far less for it, if anything, actually. And how do you start doing that? Also, it goes to the behavioral and the psychology of it. Data, data, data. If you don't know what material is available, you're going to struggle with what you're trying to achieve. So this is a study that we did for many municipalities, and I've just listed them here, where we actually went and looked at what was still going to landfill, and we characterized it, and we said, okay, we've got a lot of food waste, we've got a lot of plastic, paper, cardboard, right, what are the markets and the opportunities for that materials? Then we designed our MRFs and our goals, and we call MRFs as in material recovery facilities. And here, certainly in South Africa and SADC countries, labor, job creation is a critical component. But your material recovery facility can only handle a certain number of labor or intervention or manual sorting before you need to up the process or the throughput. Because one sorter could maybe only recover maybe 250 kilograms a shift. Whereas if you start to mechanize it, then you can up that process and recovery rate. We also looked at the macro expenditure from governments on waste type materials or the environment which is likely of a waste. And you can see there's a lot more expenditure going into environmental programs, protection of the environment, recovery of contamination, etc. So if one links your material recovery with environmental programs, certainly when it comes to funding of these MRFs, I think there's a lot of focus on that right now. So the project life cycle, and I touched on this on the left here, system analysis. Find out what your waste generation is, waste characteristics like I showed you in the graph, recyclable supply, market demand, the blue dot, and then you can really start stepping into the design of how you're going to organize this, construct it eventually, and then run into operation. So this is a slide here that starts to talk about, sorry, just trying to cancel a call there. Starts to talk about material. Right at the bottom here, you'll see if you've got a very small MRF, which you can, it's really just you've got your manual bag opening, you've got people standing there opening bags, and recovering on the floor. If you want to start increasing the efficiency and productivity, that's that red arrow on the right, then you start to intervene with a mechanical bag opener. So it's like a device that you throw your bag in and it literally has teeth and it just rips bags. And then a trommel, which is like a big screen, it rotates and it has a certain size and parts fall through. And then it goes onto conveyor belts and it recovers. If you really want to take it even further, then you go to that upper line, which is that top third of the slide here, where you really start to mix manual and mechanical, which is your bag. Then you start having hoppers, breaking things into size and components. And then you have certainly very magnetic separators at the end there, which are the magnets that recover the ferrous metals. And then your fines are typically residuals waste that goes to landfill. So this is just a very schematic. You'll see on the size on the top here, 30 to 40 meters and the little black text on the top, and then 10 to 12 meters on the right, 20 to 24 meters. So if you're building a recovery facility, you're looking at a building that's 60 to 70 meters wide and maybe 30 meters tall if you're looking at a large facility. But here you'd have an offloading, bag opener, etc. I'm just jumping through these because there's a lot more in the next event that's being held on design and management, so I don't want to take too much time on this. But you then got to say, well, then when am I going to do a clean MRF? Because a clean MRF is one where it takes source separated packaging material or source separated organic material, and it's received in a clean state. It's not commingled with other contaminants. So if you're trying to recover organics and make a recovery facility of that, you don't want to spend a huge amount of time taking out plastics and cardboard and papers and sand and spades and couches and whatever else. You want to receive it clean. There's a lot less effort. Packaging, the same. You want to receive a bag that's clean, that's dry, and it makes it a lot more for a healthy environment and the sorting environment. And these are the typical components that you could start looking. But once again, if you're starting off small, don't go delving into high technology straight away. Develop your market. Develop the sustainability and dependability of your feedstock, and then start adding components. If I was starting a MRF today, I'd first understand where am I going to get my feedstock, who's going to buy my paper or glass or cardboard. Then I'd figure out exactly how many dollars am I going to be getting. And then from there, the first thing I would do is have a nice open warehouse where I can do sorting on the floor. And then when money allows, the next thing I'd do is buy a baler. And I'm not in the industry of doing any sharing. And from there, I would actually start delving into it. So this is just a slide to show you logistics and transporting of travel. And then
Richard?
once I go into there, yes, time up.
Just to alert you about time.
Okay, sorry, I'll stop there. I'll just show you the photographs and that's it. This is a small MRF. You'll see an open, nice slide there. There's a receiving bay on the left and an open storage area for bales. Scales and offices, critical. There's another open recovery facility, very basic. Keep your CapEx down. This is a huge facility integrated with transfer station. And here's one where it shows conveyors, bunkers, balers, very key component. And that's where I end. And sorry for taking a bit long. It's a big subject, this, but yeah, hopefully I've shared what I can to the benefit.
Thank you, Richard. I think it was very insightful and very interesting. And I'm sure there will be lots of questions later. So please stay calm, everyone. Keep on your questions. We'll first hear the second presentation, and then we'll go back to Richard. And I'm sure he can also explain a few more things. And I think it was also very valid to show this whole system that just to know that it's just not a standalone solution by itself. You always have to take this bigger systems approach. So thank you for that. And now we'll go over to our second speaker. Let me just introduce him quickly to you. His name is Taufik El-Khachen. Sorry, I'm mixing up his name again. I practiced so much before. Okay, let me try again. El-Khachen. And he's currently the Middle East Program Manager for the Resources and Waste Advisory Group, RWA. He has more than 20 years of experience in the field of solid waste management, institutional development, and international development cooperation. He worked with the German International Cooperation, GIZ, in Egypt as head of the National Solid Waste Management Program. Before, Taufik worked with the GIZ Participatory Urban Development Program as head of the solid waste component, which included setting up an integrated resource recovery center in Caliubeya Governorate in Greater Cairo. And I think that's what we're going to hear more about today. So welcome, Taufik, and sorry for messing up your name again.
Thank you, Nelly. I know my name is difficult to pronounce, but you did a good job there. And thank you, Richard, for the presentation, and thank you for all the attendees for joining in. I think my presentation will follow on nicely from what Richard presented. Yeah, and I think there might be a bit of overlap as well, at least in terms of the conceptual ideas that Richard has presented. What I will talk about today is a specific facility that I've worked on. While I was working with the PDP, which is the Participatory Development Program, I'll speak about that in a minute. I will try to mainly focus, just to give a bit of diversity from what Richard presented, not necessarily all the technical specifications, but or the overall general framework conditions, and specifically the economic aspects of setting up the facility. And then at the end, I will just close by mentioning a few of our lessons learned and recommendations if anyone is looking into setting up a similar facility. So the project I worked on was called the Community-Based Solid Waste Management Project, which was embedded in this larger urban upgrading program called the PDP. And this larger program had a specific focus on urban areas upgrading through participatory methodologies. And we had a specific fund from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to set up a component within this project focusing on solid waste management. The geographical area of this project was in a governorate in the Delta region called Caliubeya Governorate, which forms part of the Greater Cairo area, so it's very close to Cairo, north of Cairo. And this project had a duration of 4 years, although that was extended later on for 2 more years. This specific project had 5 key objectives. One was to look at setting up solid waste strategies for the governorate as a whole of Caliubeya. It had a specific raising awareness, behavioral change component as well. And the third one was looking into developing capacities of stakeholders with a specific emphasis on governmental agencies. And then the fourth objective was focusing on improving the living conditions of waste collectors and recyclers. This specific geographical location of the project is one of the key recycling hubs for the informal sector in Egypt. For those who don't know, Egypt has a very long history of informal waste collection and has a very vibrant community that's working on collecting material and recycling as well. And then the fifth aspect was the establishing of a structure, which is the IRC, which I will talk about now and will be the focus of the presentation. So this is just an overview of the project that this facility was established within the context of. This is just a quick map. So if you see the Khanka facility is where the IRC was located, and Khusus city at the bottom blue circle, basically this is the city where the waste was coming from. And the focus was all on setting up integrated waste management systems within this city. Yeah, so this city is located on the south of the governorate, and yeah, it has a population of almost 700,000. By Egyptian standards, this is a very small city. And yeah, the waste generation in the specific city was 0.6 kilogram per capita per day. So it was producing around 420 tons of waste per day. The city, as I mentioned, is Khusus city, and it was located around 18 kilometers away from the location of the landfill, as well as the IRC, which was set up. And as I just mentioned, it's a key hub for informal recycling. Again, I mean, going back to what Richard was mentioning, it's very important to know your waste. And prior to setting up the facility, there was a waste characterization study that was done to understand better the type of waste that's being produced in the city. And as you will see from this diagram, basically it's a little bit more than half is organic material. And then we have about 13% or so of recyclables, and the other material is more like inert material, as well as different types of material within this waste stream. Yeah, so I mean, what is an IRC? I mean, it's I'm using here a definition that was used by Waste Concern. The whole objective, again, of this facility was to try and recover a significant portion of the input, the waste material which is entering this facility. It should be done in a decentralized manner, again, in a cost-effective way, again, something that Richard touched upon, and respecting the 3 R's principle. The facility, which I will talk about, again, to use the lingo which was used before, would be classified as a dirty MRF in a way, because, again, the waste which was being received was all commingled and mixed. At the time the facility was set up, there was no at-source separation of waste. There was a very poorly managed landfill which was reaching its full capacity, not a properly engineered landfill at all. And one of the drivers for why this facility, the IRC, was set up was to divert at least a portion of the waste going to the landfill to the facility. Again, there was a long history before of similar types of facilities that were set up all over Egypt with varying degrees of success, but the vast majority were not properly managed. And again, this goes back to the point mentioned in the early presentation about the importance of operator models, as well as the technical specifications and aspects of the facility. Another important piece of the puzzle, so to speak, or the context, is that Egypt is one of the largest cement producers in the world. It's the 12th largest. And at the time, the government of Egypt had stopped supplying natural gas to cement plants. So there was a demand for alternative fuels, and waste was being looked at as a potential option. So one of the main drivers was to actually produce refuse-derived fuel, which I will speak about again in a minute. So this facility, I mean, again, implemented through the program, had a total investment of $1 million US, more or less. It had a design capacity of 100 tons per shift, an 8-hour shift, and it was operating for most of the time only one shift. And as I said, the specific objectives was to really divert the waste from the landfill, and of course to recover resources from waste. The number one resource, which was, as I mentioned earlier, was refuse-derived fuel. This is basically the combustible part of the waste stream. Because again, there was a market for this type of product, specifically by the cement industry. The second output was the recyclable material, your paper, your plastic, your cardboard, and so forth. And the third output was the compost from the organic fraction in the facility. So this is just, yeah, to just 1 second. Yes. So this is just a quick schema or mass balance for the facility, which was set up. So from the 100 tons of input which were foreseen in the design process, this is the basic process where it's a mixture of manual as well as mechanical sorting facility. Without going too much into the detail, but what's important is to look at the outputs and the amounts that were foreseen. So we were looking at more than 80% diversion from landfill. As you can see at the pink box at the bottom, we were looking at 17 tons from the input going to the landfill, while the rest was being recovered. We again foresaw that 5% would be recyclable material. There is, of course, a difference, as you saw from the pie chart I showed earlier, that almost 13% were recyclable material, but again, because a lot of this recyclable material was already recovered before reaching the facility. So in the design phase, we foresaw that only 5% would reach this facility. The other output, the compost, was 29 tons per day, and almost a similar amount of RDF being produced. So this is all the design aspects and how we saw the process would work. I will explain later again that the reality perhaps was not exactly as we imagined at the beginning when the facility was being designed. Again, I don't want to delve too much into the technical aspects, but this is how the facility, the layout looks like. Almost 50% of that space is needed for the windrow composting, which is the big box you see in the middle. And on the right of the diagram, this is the main sorting line. As I said, there's a mixture of manual and mechanical sorting. So waste is being received, and first a lot of items are being removed before even being put on the conveyor belt and proceeding to be separated through the line. And at the far end, you will see the RDF line, as well as the baler, which was procured for the facility. To the left of the entrance at the bottom, these are all basically sheds for the equipment. So the whole facility was 20,000 square meters. And as I will explain later, this was even a bit smaller than the space that was needed for such an operation, and specifically for the reason that the composting side of things takes up a lot of space in the facility. And this is just a quick picture of how the line would look like after it was set up. Again, this is just information. I don't want to go into details on. The important part I said, which is the composting area. You will see there almost taking up half of the surface area which was needed for the facility. This is a similar list of equipment. So basically, as what Richard was mentioning earlier, including cost. I mean, the absolute costs, of course, are not important or relevant. Maybe in other settings, costs will vary. So these are all local costs. A lot of the material were procured actually locally. Again, in Egypt, we have a very strong industry in the production of such machinery, whether the mobile equipment as well as the steel structures and the conveyor belts, etc. So we were able to procure actually a lot of the equipment we needed in the local market. There are other costs, again, which are not mentioned here, which you would need to take into account when setting up such a facility, which of course are the engineering costs, the earthworks. There were other mobile equipment, of course. So this is just the basic costs for the line. But again, the total cost was in the range of $1 million US at the time. Of course, this was almost 8-9 years ago. Again, running costs, perhaps not relevant, and maybe in other settings the costs will vary, but the important part, of course, is when calculating costs is to include contingencies, which in practice, of course, we used quite a bit of these contingency costs actually. In Egypt, again, personnel costs are quite low, perhaps compared to other countries. So relatively speaking, I would say that the operational costs of this facility could be considered on the low side. And yeah, there were about 44 people working on site in this facility, ranging from laborers, engineers, guards, etc.
Tawfiq, just also to remind you a bit of time.
Okay, I'll move quickly now. I mean, again, this is the material which was being recovered, and in the feasibility study, there was a feasibility study that was done to see what the revenue we could get from the facility. No need to go through the details here. What I want to really perhaps focus on, again, because this facility was set up through an international development cooperation project, the investment was coming from the donor, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. The revenue from recyclables was a heavy component. The price of RDF was in the feasibility was looked at as, because this was a new sort of output, we looked at different scenarios of how the RDF cost can actually cover, at what price would the RDF cost be feasible to cover the cost of this facility. And as you will see here, if you look at the full cost recovery, it was 144 LE, which by today's prices will be almost $6 per ton. And if you only want to cover the operating costs, facilities would be like $0.6. Now, the projections versus the reality, and I guess this is one of the most important lessons learned, is that the combustible fraction of waste, which we anticipated would be like 28%, ended up being 20% and even less, between 18 and 20%. Recyclable material was also less than 5% reaching the facility, again due to the fact that a lot of it was picked up before reaching the facility. We foresaw that there will be gate fees being provided by the municipality to cover part of the cost. Again, this was not foreseen by the municipality, and there were a lot of negotiations on this point. But for a lot of municipalities, and I guess this is part of the challenge, these facilities are revenue generating facilities and not seen as sort of waste management facilities in a way, providing a public service. Composting prices were again a bit low, and the demand for that was not consistent. Again, and in terms of operation and total volume being received, 100 tons was sort of the optimal amount or that could be managed by the facility, but in reality, due to the operational inefficiencies, the amount was more in the range of 70 to 80 tons per shift. This facility was operated by Geocycle or Ecosem, which is a subsidiary of Lafarge, which is a cement company. There was an open tender process, and they basically won this tender to operate the facility. A lot of challenges that were faced, mostly again the obligation on the municipalities to provide the right type of waste, which was again municipal household waste, even though it was mixed. So often there will be also pressure to bring in like trucks carrying construction and demolition waste and stuff, which of course had to be rejected at the gate, but it was again delays and the operational process. So this was part of the challenges. The space, as I mentioned, for windrow composting is quite extensive. And if you don't have a very efficient process and a well-controlled process for producing this compost, you might end up with accumulations in the facility. The amount of recyclables, as I said, I mentioned these points, so I'll just skip quickly. Again, to reiterate what Richard was mentioning, I mean, your starting point is again knowing your waste very well. Even though we did the study, there were still some differences between what we projected we would receive and the actual waste amounts and types that were received at the facility. So perhaps there a more extensive study with a better sampling methodology could have helped us avoid this issue. Understanding the context, again, I think this point was mentioned before. I mean, you cannot look at MRFs or IRCs in a vacuum. You have to fully understand the waste system in place. One of the main challenges we faced is that, I mean, landfilling is very cheap. Although, as I mentioned earlier, there was a lot of pressure on the landfill at the time we set up the facility. As land started becoming available in other areas, there was again no incentive as such for the operator of the facility to, specifically on the organic fraction of waste, to produce compost, again, because landfilling is very cheap, almost at no cost. So this was an important element of the puzzle, and we need to look at the system as a whole and what policies are in place. Diversification of outputs. Again, there was a heavy reliance as the operation started on the the combustible fraction of waste. And as I said, this constitutes 20% or less of the input. And again, what happens with the rest? I mean, if the operator of the facility is specifically just focusing on this aspect of resource recovery, you will end up not achieving your diversion targets. So of course, it's beneficial, and it's something that's good to sort of extract that fraction. But looking at the bigger picture, diversion targets were not achieved per se from the facility. Again, operations very challenging. You need to have a proper operator model with different scenarios, I would say, and anticipating sort of worst case scenarios, I would say. Even in the aspect of, I mean, the sorting line, which I described, there was a bit of it which is manual picking up. And if this process, again, is not efficient, then your output will be affected. And that takes time and training for people to know, the workers actually to know how to separate waste. That takes a bit of time. From day one, it doesn't work, and you need to invest in this training. Again, because of this was, as I said earlier, mixed household waste that was being received, the compost quality, of course, was being affected. And this is why it's ideal to have waste sorted from the beginning. There were even issues with heavy metal contamination because people throw all sorts of things in their waste bags. So marketing and producing compost with high quality was definitely one of the main challenges. The point here, which again, the stated objective has to be clear. I mean, if the objective is to achieve 80% diversion targets, then this has to be reflected in the contracts for the operators. I mean, looking at the facilities as just revenue generating facilities, I mean, you have to then plan for what happens if a particular market for a particular facility for a particular output, which was in our case the organic fraction, doesn't really is fluctuating, or it's not as anticipated. There has to be a solution where there could be more investment being put in to actually improve the quality of the compost that was being produced. Effective policies are very important at the national and the local level. Again, issues of pricing, of landfilling, issues of promoting composting, for example, in national land reclamation projects. These are all very important to create markets which are needed.
Just if possible, I would like to cut it here. I mean, maybe we can leave your slide on a bit, just because I want to have, I see there are lots of questions. I just want to use the time for the questions. Is that okay with you?
Sure. I mean, this is my last slide, but it's up anyway.
Yes, I think
the point, if I can just close by one statement, which is at the end. Again, the issue of waste management as a public service versus the revenue generating aspects of it. I mean, for developing countries, I think sometimes we don't get the basics right. So we need to really focus on waste management again as a public service, because the discourse on revenue generation sometimes is misunderstood, specifically by decision makers. We can talk about that later as well. Yeah. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much for this interesting presentation. And for like I think it's a really, as you said, it was really good to see this other side of what Richard also presented. But I mean, I think in the main parts, you also agreed there is a need for data. So I want to use this opportunity to remind everyone that UN Habitat, together with some partners, developed the Waste-Wise Cities tool, which helps cities in gathering exactly that data that you need to have to plan your MRFs or your RRCs. And yeah, there are different types of MRFs, as we heard. There are the ones that Richard preferred, which he referred to as the clean MRFs, and also now we got an example of what he referred to as dirty MRFs or IRCs. So I think this really showed a bit of the variety that is out there. And thank you so much for sharing also this very valuable lessons learned topic. I think that's very interesting to see what, even though a lot of like everyone thinks so much about the planning, that it still always comes a bit different than you expect. So now I'm also asking Richard to join us, and we will take on the questions to see that the last 15 minutes we can take off. And in interest of time, I'll just read out the first questions, and then if we still have some time, I'll also reach out again directly to some of the, like, we will give audience the possibility to unmute themselves. And let me just open that poll and to directly answer to that. So just to mention to everyone, there was one question about the comment from Richard on awareness does not change behavior. He kindly answered that question already because it's, well, interesting, but not really in the scope of today's webinar. So everyone can have a look at that in the questions panel, and he kindly answered that in there. So Taufik, first question to you from Dorian Tosi Robinson. In developing countries, usually the inversion that has to be done for such facilities is not feasible. Who invested for the plant in Egypt? Furthermore, costs usually are not covered by the selling of materials. How is the plant sustainable in terms of costs? Is it then replicable elsewhere? Sorry, he said he got parts of that, so he would be knowing, can this be done without investment from a donor? So basically, that's the summary of his question.
Yeah, I mean, the investment, as you said, is from the donor, but again, here it's very important to factor in the reinvestments which would be needed down the line. The fact that money is coming from a donor is not the end and be all of solutions. You need to really think ahead. In terms of, again, I mean, this is really the main point I was trying to make, is that without financing from municipalities, the expectation is that these facilities would cover their cost from the sale of material. But yeah, the RDF market in Egypt is now booming. The prices are going high. So there could be potential for covering parts of the costs from the sale of RDF. But what I wanted to mention is that even if that's the case, and you're just focusing on the sale of RDF, you're ending up with close to 80% of your waste not being treated or not being managed and then going to landfill. So you've set up all this facility, even if economically the sale of RDF can cover parts of the cost, or even if it can cover the full cost, you're not factoring in the environmental costs of taking the rejects from this facility and taking it to the landfill. Simply because the operators only focus on this energy-rich fraction, because this is where the market is. If you're asking the operator of this facility now to produce high-quality compost, then the equation for the cost will be changed, and they will need to be paid for that. They will need to be paid to operate this facility properly. Right now, what's happening is that because cement companies can internalize the costs, and a lot of them are actually operating waste facilities. So the facility which I mentioned now is managed by a subsidiary of a cement company. They can internalize these costs. For them, it's a cost-saving operation because they're substituting other types of fuel, such as coal, for example. This is an interesting dynamic that we have in Egypt, but I also know that it can happen or happening in other countries. The key point is that without the municipalities paying for the service provider, what will happen is that only RDF gets produced at the end, which is more or less the case now in this facility.
Sorry, I was gone for a second. I think I'm back. Okay, great. Thank you so much, Tawfiq, for answering that question. Richard, where you talked about, like you said, there are small and large MRFs and probably also medium. For what you presented as a small MRF, what would you say is the average size and how much tons can be processed? How many?
Yeah, it's an excellent question and very relevant. It's a so-called small RF, inverted commas, is about 300 tons per month, maybe going up to about 500 tons. A large MRF, you're probably looking at around 100 or 1,500 or up to 1,500 tons a month. So you mentioned that
Richard, so unhappy I am about that. Could you turn off your camera again? Because unfortunately, we really hear you better with with the camera. Sorry.
Sorry about that. No, it's quite all right. So I'm not too sure how much that is clear, but yeah, small MRF is 300, 500 tons a month. 500 tons a month could obviously be more. And it really depends on so you have mentioned that your project had one shift, I believe, per day, which essentially is about a 8 or 10 period because you have an hour to stop and close down, etc. So ability will work on just to up their rate, but yeah, use that.
Okay, thank you. Then we go over. We have another question for Tawfiq, just like two rather short ones. The first one was if you could remind us when the equipment line was bought, like just the timeline, because to have an idea of the price compared to today. And then another, this is from Jessica Cow, and then another question maybe from hold on. If you're from Johannes Sommer, if you overcame the challenge that the municipalities are not willing to pay gate fee or support in any different way, and if you do see the challenge mainly in the profit-oriented business or also in the involvement of foreign organizations.
Yes, so first question on the timelines. I mean, this facility was, it became operational in 2014, mid-2014. So yeah, so the process of, I mean, it took a year and a half to actually to tender and the construction and to set it up. Because it was already an existing actually location, so some of the structure were already were used. For example, we didn't have to do everything from scratch. So this is on the timeline. The second question on the whether we overcame, if I understood you correctly, whether we overcame the challenge of the gate fees. Unfortunately, no. And again, this goes back to the mindset of municipalities. I mean, the mindset of municipalities as well as the current operator model. I mean, if, as I said, you have cement companies operating these facilities, they are willing to pay municipalities to actually have access to the waste, which means that this facility operates in a way like a rental, on a rental basis. So they pay the municipalities money instead of the other way around. And this distorts the whole concept, again, of again, integrated waste management. It's, as I said, it's good that we're recovering part of the fraction of the waste which is combustible, which otherwise would have gone to a landfill. But because this fraction is small compared to the total input, we're not achieving the total objective. Right now, there are a lot of efforts to actually explain and on a national level even explore different business models or operator models, so to speak. and trying to internalize these environmental costs. So it requires a shift in mindset, and it's very difficult to convince municipalities which are currently taking money that they actually have to pay for such a service. But this gap again is the environmental cost, so to speak. They don't see that part. So the short answer is I don't think it's, we have fully overcame this challenge, but there are efforts, as I said, on the national level to do that.
Okay, thank you, Taufik. And yeah, probably it always is also a mindset behind all those things. Great. I'm just scrolling through the questions. I think some of them were already answered. Let me just have another look. Maybe Richard, could you let's try to see if you can if your connection has improved. Here, this one was the one I wanted to ask you. What do you think is needed besides, I mean, especially as we heard right now that the municipalities are often not bought in or are not supporting this project. So what do you think is needed to, what do you need to consider for financial stability of such projects? I mean, you mentioned it a bit in your presentation, but maybe you can just summarize quickly again.
Operating spend.
Unfortunately, we really don't hear you. It's so seems to be.
Sorry about
okay,
that.
Try again.
Right. Okay. It boils down quickly to obviously your capital spend and your operating spend of what's going on for your project, and more often than not, it can't be seen as necessarily a burden on the municipality, because more often than not that municipalities are trying to provide general and basic infrastructure, housing, water, roads, access, and unfortunately solid waste facilities and especially material recovery facilities is what we call not a sexy subject. It doesn't attract the attention of the chief financial officer or the municipal manager or whatever the case is. So it struggles to get a large cut of any funding or budget. But what we've used quite often, which shows to be the happy medium, is that the municipality themselves often have land. They have the capacity of the staff that they have already, which is able to license the land, do any potential studies, because they already have existing capabilities, plant, equipment, staff to do that and get the license. They can also provide basic infrastructure to the land, whether it be roads, access, and more specifically so also access to the feedstock, and then an open market. Plus then piggyback on that, awareness campaigns, and supporting the operator in trying to get people to produce quality feedstock, i.e. separated source, or produce their products. And that alone on itself is not literally a capital spend on any budget sheet to a municipality. It's more what we call in-kind contribution. And more often than not, that helps a lot, especially if you're starting to start getting grant funding or the like. Then it shows that the municipality is investing and they can do it without literally spending off their budget sheets. I don't know.
Great, thank you. And now we heard you very well, so the connection seems to have improved. In regards of time, maybe one last question or two questions to Taufik. There was one question, if you could explain just in one sentence why the personal costs were so high. And also, I wanted to ask you, well, there are too many questions now. If we're gonna skip that question. Yeah, if there's anything that you can do to, in the design or in the technologies used to be able to handle the highly vicious waste that tends to stick onto other wastes. It's maybe a more different question. Taufik, I think you're muted, or at least I don't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, so the first question is on personnel costs and why they are high. Well, I mean, again, it's as you will see from the design of the facility, it has various components. So you have the composting part, and you have the RDF side of things, and then there's a lot of manual sorting as well taking place. Simply because the bags that were being received and the waste that's coming into the facility was, again, very heterogeneous, and sometimes even waste that you don't expect to see. As I said, we sometimes they got construction and demolition waste, sometimes dead animals and stuff. I mean, this is a semi-urban setting, so there was a lot of laborers working on the manual sorting as well as laborers on the line themselves. But yeah, I mean, again, by Egyptian standards, so to speak, it was labor costs are in Egypt are quite low, so sometimes it's yeah, better to have something that done manually than sorry, what was the second question?
Just about if there's anything you can do about waste that tends to stick onto other waste.
I mean, the process, maybe we didn't go into the details there. I mean, it starts again by bag opener. We had first of all the manual sorting, and then we had the magnetic separation and the wind sifter. So I mean, there were a lot of different stages along the line to actually avoid that, but there was nothing specifically, to be honest, done on waste that's really sticking. Maybe Richard has something to say on that. I mean, we didn't really face such an issue beyond what I described, and how the line, from a technical point of view, worked relatively well in delivering the outputs as we foresaw it.
Sure, Richard, you want to add something on that? Problems with sticky waste?
Yeah.
And maybe turn on off your camera when you're answering. Thank you.
No problem. No, I think you buttoned it down. It boils down very quickly to, throughput and efficiency of throughput. As soon as you start to sacrifice mechanical intervention, you lower your throughput. You lower your throughput means you lower your output. You lower your output means less revenue. Less revenue makes the project obviously less affordable. So it's a bit of a vicious circle, but you also want to promote labor intensive, or certainly in Southern African and African conditions, certainly from a youth employment point of view and a general employment point of view, you want to promote labor. But labor, like I said, only has a certain capacity or able to recover as much as they can, and where mechanical intervention promotes more throughput or efficiency. But yeah, certainly what we find is it's not really just the mechanical or operating plant or equipment that's used, it's also the advancement of that technology, because immediately it starts boiling down to spares and the opportunity to service, maintain. And, more often than not, I was involved in a design very recently where there's a huge amount of sand that started finding its way into the waste stream. And immediately that starts to destroy your conveyor belts, your screens, because it grinds, and your wearing rate of teeth, like your bag splitters, etc., start to struggle, and you're replacing those parts twice as fast. So that affects your operating costs. So it's very particular, every solution and mechanical plant equipment, to the actual environment and the type of waste and the quality of the waste or the feedstock that you're getting, against its efficiency and its prolonged life.
Okay, great. Thank you so much to both of you. And we are unfortunately at the end of our short webinar, and we will try to maybe, well, also to let you know that probably we will have some of this also again in our newsletter that we'll send out with the Waste City. So we might try to answer also some of the questions that we were not able to answer now in writing later, and also through the newsletter. So thank you so much, Richard and Taufik, for being able to join us today and report about your experiences. It was very interesting. I think every one of us learned a lot. And thank you for the audience for joining. And yeah, as we heard, it's a complex thing, but we shouldn't lose all hope in solving together all these challenges around solid waste management. We need to start at some point. We heard this point as at first data, and then taking into consideration your whole system. So let's try to keep doing that and encourage each other on the way, and share knowledge and experiences. So thank you again. Thank you, everyone. Stay safe, stay healthy, and see you next week for our second webinar with 2 more speakers and more about MRFs. So don't miss out on that if you still have more questions. See you next week. Bye.
Thank you.